But we'll just get started. The topic of today's talk, or this workshop, is not back-end lead engineer. That's me. Resolving misconnections. So really, we're talking about error handling. And in my context, my day-to-day life, when things go wrong, it's because the connection's broken. So presumably, some or all of you are app developers of some kind who integrate with APIs that don't always work. And some of those fixes are outside of your control. So what do you do? So we're going to talk about some things that I do, my team does, how we think about things. And then I'd love for this to be a discussion. So if you guys are willing to get into it with me. I love this topic. I love the satisfaction of fixing something that's broken, even when it's not mine to fix. And hopefully some of you do too. So I'd love to hear how you guys do things. So we'll start with just setting the stage a little bit. Just in terms of terminology, I'm going to talk about upstream systems and downstream systems. And if you're not familiar with those particular terms, let's say you are an app developer, you have your app, and you have a user on the other side of your app who is trying to do a job. And that user, in order to do that job, you need to provide them with data, and you are getting that data from an upstream system. So the flow of data goes upstream to downstream, right? Just like our rivers. And so for us, for me, my users are almost exclusively trying to connect to an account at a financial institution. That's sort of our domain. And so their data flows from their financial institution through our platform down to the app that's presenting them with whatever they're trying to do, whether they're verifying accounts, checking balances, that kind of thing. And so we, all of us, we're trying to maintain uptimes, right? We want our systems to be as stable as possible. All of our partners are trying to do the same thing. Things go wrong, right? So what do we do? And we still want to be cognizant of what our user's trying to accomplish, right? And so do we just bail because an upstream system is borked? No, we want to be able to provide our users with some options in order to still maybe attempt to rescue whatever it is they're trying to do. So that's what we're going to talk about. And this is really the framework I use. It's a mnemonic I keep in mind. I've used this for years. So it's pretty simple, the 3 R's. The first thing we do is detect that an error has happened. So in code, you're probably doing this in like a try-catch block or checking the status of a connection, maybe a field on a response object. It could be a little deeper than that, where you're analyzing data that's coming back to make sure it's valid. Any of those things can trigger like an error condition or can help you notice that an error has occurred. And so, and also, it's not just data errors, right? So maybe your upstream system is flat out unavailable. Maybe it's glitching. It's temporarily unavailable. Maybe there's like an SLA violation. So the first thing you have to think about is how are we going to detect all of those things as much as possible. Second step, super simple, log the event. And you might not always log the event, right? Log or alert or whatever that looks like for your particular context. But the reason I keep it on here and the reason I use this mnemonic is to remind myself that failing silently by accident is usually a recipe for disaster down the road. It makes troubleshooting really hard, as I'm sure all of you know. So this is just a reminder for me to log the event, maybe set up an alert if this is something worth waking someone up in the middle of the night for example. Just keep track of, give myself or my team enough information for debugging later. And then, of course, like the meat of this is the bottom of this little pyramid. How are we going to react to this, right? What is our handling strategy? So there's options, right? Do we retry the call? Do we take alternative actions? Do we just say we can't do anything about this? And what messaging are we going to give to the user in all of those cases? The product I work on every day is a front end, like a UI widget. And our clients use that to connect to upstream systems. And so a lot of the time, my primary concern is, yes, I know something went wrong. Yes, I know that task didn't succeed, but this user is trying to do something important. And so we have to give them enough information in our widget. And usually that means structuring data in a different way, handling responses in a different way, and trying to wrap that all into a context that's meaningful for our users. And so then the handling action you take will obviously depend on what type of error that occurred. I think about error handling and classification. We're not going to get too much into it today for time reasons, but I think of it in terms of this last point, like how are we going to react to it? So I'll tend to group errors that are all handled the same way or all treated the same way as the same thing. So for example, system errors, a lot of times, not a lot, in some cases you can handle them with a retry. So those become like a particular category of errors for me. Your actual classifications are going to depend on primarily your domain, right? So, and I think of this in like two structures, right? So you have your system errors that we just talked about, where system is unavailable, timeouts, SLA violations, auth. Let's not talk about auth for a second. But those kind of things are system errors. They're common across domains. Everybody deals with them. They're no surprises there, right? And then the other kind of big category, and where it gets really interesting, is your like domain specific. So for us, we think about, okay, so we try to get account data. Is that account data valid? If it's not valid, the user doesn't care that we got it. It doesn't help them achieve their goal. So we have to think about that. It's very specific to our domain, to the problems we're trying to solve, and how we detect that and how we message that back out to the user is what we think about here. Any questions so far? We're going to get into code real fast. Okay. Okay, so common errors. Again, probably everything on your right or your left is likely familiar. 404s, 500s, 503s. System responds too slowly, so maybe you have like SLAs in place that you're trying to meet. When in our domain, when we think about errors, one big classification of errors we think about is user actionable. So what this means for us is these are errors that have occurred that we cannot do anything about. At best, we can give the user information. So these are things that the user ultimately has to take action on, and we see it as our responsibility to inform the user of as much information as possible so that they know what the appropriate action to take is. So bad credentials. In our widget, our clients are using MX as an intermediary to connect to a financial institution, right? If we don't do our job right, if a user enters bad credentials, it could be because they didn't realize what system they were trying to log into, right? And so that's an important thing. We don't know that they use their Chase account instead of their Wells Fargo account. We don't know that. We just know that we told them to log in and Wells Fargo or Chase or whoever rejected it, right? So how do we represent that in the UI to give them enough context to trigger that memory, that realization that, oh, maybe I did that wrong. Real example, on Monday, I troubleshooted an error where someone's dad had caps lock on and didn't realize it for 20 minutes. Like super, and I don't mean to like, not because he was a dad, but like this happens, right? Like caps lock, it's so simple. But, and we realized it would be super simple for us to detect that caps lock is on. In the case of a bad credential, maybe we point that out to a user and ask them to turn it off and try again. Windows has been doing it for years. Right? Lack of authorization. So this one's interesting. If you guys are familiar with OAuth flows, and if anybody has questions about these specific examples, let's talk. But in certain flows and with certain institutions, it's not enough for the user to log in to like go through the OAuth flow and like just give us like authenticate with the institution. Some institutions require you to additionally authorize the sharing of particular data. And some institutions will give their users control over different types of data. So accounts versus transactions, this account, not that account, that kind of thing. So when we go through our flow, the user's logged in, that's fine, but we're trying to retrieve accounts and there's none. All the user sees is you didn't give me any data. And we're saying we didn't get any data from the upstream institution. So that's another example of we couldn't do what we needed to do. The user has to go and authorize us to do the to give us permission to see those accounts, but we have to communicate that in a meaningful way to them, specific to that institution. And then another big category for us is failures during like multi-factor authentication. There are like so many ways MFA can fail. We think about this every day, so users get distracted in the like 3 minutes it takes them to get their code. Users fat finger their code, and it's less obvious than fat fingering your password, for example. Sometimes MFA messages don't actually get sent. Like there's an error somewhere else out of band to us in the system that affects our flow. So again, user actionable, but we have a responsibility, and this is like a challenge. This is like the big challenge of our whole error handling strategy. So I'd like to open it up. First of all, are like my examples resonating? People understand like what OAuth is, and yeah, okay, great. I'm among friends. Okay, so anybody have like examples of errors that like are like kind of funky like that in your life? Or everything's pretty straightforward? Yeah.
We have this thing where you can like connect payroll providers.
Yeah.
It's third party, but like sometimes the token that they use expires.
Yeah.
And that results in failure, and like we get a particular code back, but like it has to be a very specific message and all of that. So like there's something I'm working on right now, so like, how to handle that, and then like basically responding to that to let them know, hey, you have to go back in and like reconnect your payroll. So
Yeah, exactly. So as you're handling it right now, what are the things that you're thinking about in terms of handling it?
I mean, we're using like our event system that we have.
Okay.
And so basically that's what handles it. And then, but again, like you have to look at like the company we're using now. Again, they're very specific messaging and like making sure that all lines up. Because it's a 401 error, but they have like 6 variations of that error. So it's like, cool, which one is it? You know?
Yeah. So you have to build like your own catalog specific to that upstream partner, right? Yeah. Right on. Yeah, cool. So that's like a good example of exactly what we're talking about. Okay, so like other questions I asked myself as we're thinking about these characteristics that you might think about with regards to errors beyond straight classification. Are these error conditions transient or persistent? And the way you handle transient errors versus persistent errors are obviously different. Primarily, this will determine whether we handle a retry or not. So transient errors, retries might help you get along the way. Persistent errors, retry isn't going to help you. And sometimes you have to retry before you realize they're persistent, right? And then like I said, we think about how to present these back to the user. What is our messaging? If we can provide alternate actions for them, we try and give them that instruction. And then the last thing is like truly unexpected scenarios. So we've gone through a bunch of examples that we obviously have anticipated and know that we're going to run into, but you sort of need that fail-safe, catch-all. What are we going to do, and what can we do? And this is, I think this, for us anyway, our widget doesn't do this, but like in your app or whatever, this is the point where you say, please call 1-800-MY-SUPPORT and we'll help you, right? Okay, so there is, actually, while I'm going through this example, there's a GitLab link there. So I should have done a QR code. I didn't realize this till later. But that's my GitHub, DevCon 2022. Should be easy to find, hopefully. You can clone that repository. So if you want to get that going, if you're interested in getting into code, it's a React app with a Node backend. And it uses our widget, so we're like right in my wheelhouse. And the app has basically a front end and a back end, so you'll want to run them in 2 terminals. And while you're doing that, let's walk through an example. So this is like a pretty typical kind of issue for us. So Betty, my user, is using Awesome Money, which is our app, not ours, but like our example app for this workshop, to transfer rent money to her new landlord. First, she needs to verify her bank account in order to set up that ACH transfer. And then Awesome Money, this app that you're all cloning, will use Betty's retrieval. So just a quick check-in. How's everyone doing? Is anybody still looking at this code? I don't want anyone to feel like you're trapped here. If you need to go and do something else, that's fine too. We can wrap up. But I'm going to be here for probably another hour. So if you want to hang out and talk shop, whether it's about errors or our API specifically or something else, I'm down. I will say, I will put in a little plug. We have our MX conference in about a month, and we're planning on having like a developer track, which we're really hoping developers come because we'd really like to jam with you guys on real code. So I promised my team I'd put that up there. There's a QR code that gives you more information about that. So, and feel free to come and grab a t-shirt because we got lots of them.